morning. My name is Patricia Sweisford. I'm a native El Pasoan, a retired teacher, retired fitness instructor, and I love to cook. So today what we're going to do is show you how to make sourdough, Earl Grey, vegan muffins, cakes, or breads. This recipe can be put in a cake pan, in a muffin pan, or in a bread pan. So what we're going to do is talk a little bit about what we're doing. And first off, I have to, because we're not using eggs, we have to make our own emulsifier, which is using flaxseed meal and water, and it has to sit for 5 minutes. So I'm going to mix that together. And because we're not using eggs, we're using the flaxseed, and eggs and the flaxseed have the same purpose. They are used as emulsifiers, and they also bring structure to the baked goods that you're making. So we're going to set the timer for 5 minutes. Well, let's do this one. How did I get into sourdough? Well, during the pandemic, my friend Patty Flynn told me about sourdough baking, and it sounded very interesting. So she gave me some sourdough starter, and I have since dehydrated starter and sent it to my niece in Montana and my cousin in Pueblo, Colorado. So they rehydrate it, and they're able to use the same starter. The thing with starter is you have to feed it in order for it to grow. And so when I make starter, I can use 100 grams, maybe a little bit less, but then I have to feed it. And I use 100% hydration, meaning 100% water and then 100% flour, but I use 3 different kinds of flour. I use 20 grams of wheat flour, 20 grams of now I forgot, 20 grams of rye flour and 80 grams of all-purpose flour. So what we're going to do today is look at the ingredients, and while we're waiting for the flaxseed to do its thing, we're going to put in the sourdough starter. There's 100 grams, and I always weigh everything on my scale. All right, so this is 100 grams of sourdough. And the cake is made with yogurt. So this is our yogurt. And it's just plain vanilla Greek yogurt. So we're going to mix all the liquids together. Two teaspoons of vanilla and vegetable oil. And we'll just leave this in the mixer bowl until we get the timer for our 5 minutes. And I like to use a paddle. And then I'm going to mix my flours, my sugar. This container has salt, baking powder, and baking soda. But we don't mix salt directly with the sourdough because it tends to slow down the fermentation. So that's my flour, my leavening, my sugar, and I like to mix with a fork. And the recipe has Earl Grey tea in it. So I just buy Earl Grey tea in the tea bags, open them up, and this particular one I had to grind a little bit. And when you actually cut into the bread or the cake, it's going to be kind of dark, and that's from the tea. So here goes the tea. And I used 3 tea bags of tea. And I changed the recipe. I got the recipe off of a sourdough group that I belong to on Facebook. And I added chopped pecans and lemon zest. And that's not in their recipe, so now I can claim this is my recipe because I've changed it. And you could use walnuts, but I like the combination of the walnuts and the lemon zest. And once we put the batter in the pan that we're going to use, and we're using a loaf pan this morning, I sprinkle vanilla sugar that my husband makes just over the top. So that'll be at the very end before we put it in the oven. And there's our timer. When I mix sourdough, I always use it on the low speed of the mixer. And sourdough is always fun to make, but the problem with sourdough is it takes a long time. If you make bread, you have to ferment it, usually in warm temperatures, for several hours, and then sometimes even put it in the refrigerator overnight. I like this recipe because it only ferments for 30 minutes. Okay? So we're waiting for it to mix. After it finishes mixing, then we'll add the flour mixture. Then we have to let it sit for 30 minutes. So in the meantime, we'll show you a product that I made last night, but it's in the round version. And the flaxseed has to mix with the oil, and that's the emulsifying, and that takes a little bit longer. And I believe you keep it on low so that you don't toughen up the structure. All right, we're ready to add the flour, the sugar. And remember, I told you the salt goes in with the flour. You don't want it directly into the sourdough and the oils, because the flour tends to slow down the fermentation. And we'll mix this again on slow. And then we're going to have to wait 30 minutes. And we'll set the timer for 30 minutes. And set the other timer for 20 minutes because we're going to have to preheat the oven. And now we just wait. All right, the timer's just gone off, so this is set for 30 minutes to ferment, and we're ready to put it in the loaf pan and pop it in the oven. Now it has to cook I'd set the timer for 75 minutes, but I'll keep an eye on it. And to know if it's really, really done, you would take the temperature, and when it reaches 210 degrees, it's done. I like to kind of look at it as when it starts browning around the edges, as that's a signal that it's done. And of course, as it gets closer to being done, the aroma of the cooking is just awesome. And this is a large loaf pan. I had a smaller one and I kept thinking, I think I better bring the large one because it's going to rise at least to the top of the pan. And I told you I like to sprinkle vanilla sugar on top to give it just a little crusty. And like we said, it goes in the oven. The oven is 325 degrees. And you can see I put parchment paper in the pan, and I did grease the edges of the pan too. And I usually put it not on the bottom shelf, but like a middle shelf. But we'll keep an eye. And then we'll set the timer for 75 minutes. But maybe around 70, when you start smelling it, let's look at it. Then pull it out of the oven at 75. Put the thermometer in. When it reaches 210, it's good to go. Then you'll remove it from the oven and let it set for about 20 minutes, and then you can cut into it. This is the cake I made last night to show you that you can make it as a round cake, you can make it as a loaf, or you can make it as muffins in muffin tins using cupcake tins. But it's really good, much better, when it's still warm. And you need to wait about 20 minutes after you take it out of the oven before you cut it and sample it. This is really good with coffee, or I imagine Earl Grey tea. And you can see the dark texture from the Earl Grey tea. Kind of looks like banana bread. And a dollop of whipped cream. Are you ready? All right. It's really good warm though.